I sat quietly at the long wooden table in the courtroom, my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to keep them from shaking. Across from me sat Daniel, my husband of 6 years, or rather, soon to be ex husband. He looked pristine as ever in his tailored navy suit, flashing that same smug smile he'd worn since the moment we walked into the room. When the judge asked him to confirm that he wanted to proceed with the divorce, he signed the papers with an exaggerated flourish and said just loud enough for me to hear, "Finally, freedom from Florence Nightingale." A few of his friends sitting behind him chuckled. I didn't respond. I just kept my eyes on the judge. Daniel had always enjoyed being cruel in quiet, polished ways. He called it honesty. I used to call it stress. Now I just saw it for what it was, arrogance dressed up as charm. He thought he was walking away with everything: the house, the savings, the business property he conveniently got me to co-sign on. He thought he'd leave me with barely enough to rent a one-bedroom apartment. But Daniel didn't know everything. And he definitely didn't know about the sealed envelope the judge was opening at that very moment. This document. Judge Halston began adjusting her glasses. Was submitted this morning by counsel for Mrs. Harper. It is a notarized letter and legal supplement to the estate of the late Miss Evelyn Harper. Daniel barely reacted. He probably thought it was some emotional plea, another irrelevant piece of paper from the poor nurse who never knew when to quit. The judge cleared her throat and began reading. "To my daughter Olivia," she began. "If you are hearing this, it means that the worst has happened. But I also trust that the truth is finally coming to light. Enclosed with this letter is documentation of a trust fund I created in your name over 20 years ago." Daniel's smile began to falter. The judge continued. "The trust is to remain separate from any marital assets and cannot be accessed or transferred by a spouse or legal partner. It is to be released only under two conditions: upon your 35th birthday or upon legal separation due to betrayal or abuse." I felt Daniel shift in his seat. Judge Halston looked up, her voice firm and clear. "The trust fund in question holds a balance of $3.5 million. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom." Daniel's lawyer leaned over to whisper something, but Daniel just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. For the first time in years, I looked back at him and smiled. "My name is Olivia Harper. For most of my adult life, I worked as a registered nurse at a small assisted living center on the edge of town. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't lucrative, but it was meaningful. I loved my patients. I loved knowing I was making even the smallest difference in someone's day. But love doesn't pay mortgages, and it definitely doesn't impress people like Daniel. I met Daniel Marks at a hospital fundraiser. He was giving a keynote on sustainable architecture. I was only there because my unit manager begged me to attend. Daniel stood at the podium in his expensive shoes and bespoke suit, gesturing like a man born to command attention. After the event, he walked straight over to me, said I had a kind face, and asked if I liked wine. I did. We had dinner that same evening. He was charming, well-read, funny when he wanted to be. I told myself he saw something in me that others overlooked. I didn't come from money. My mother, Evelyn, raised me alone on a seamstress's wages. We shared a tiny two-bedroom house and never missed a bill, but there was nothing fancy about our lives. Still, Daniel made me feel chosen. Within 6 months, we were engaged. He proposed in front of his friends at a garden party he threw himself. The ring was large, the applause even larger. I remember thinking I must be dreaming. We got married in spring. Everything looked perfect in the photos, Daniel beaming me, holding a bouquet of ivory roses, a soft breeze lifting my veil. What those photos didn't show were the cracks that had already begun to form. Small, barely noticeable at first, like hairline fractures in glass. The first time he joked about my job, I laughed with him. He called me his adorable little Florence Nightingale and patted my head. When I told him about a difficult patient, he rolled his eyes and said, "You get so emotional over dying people, Liv. You have to learn to detach." I brushed it off. He was under stress. He was trying to build his firm. I told myself not to be so sensitive. Over time, the jokes got sharper. He started correcting me in front of friends, calling my opinions on politics or finance cute. When I mentioned wanting to pursue a master's in healthcare administration, he chuckled and said, "Why go into more debt for a career that won't ever match mine?" He said it with a smile. Always with a smile. That was Daniel's specialty, hurting with grace. Still, I convinced myself he loved me. He told me he did. And when someone says they love you often enough, you start to believe them, even when their actions say otherwise. After my mother passed, I fell into a quiet depression. Daniel didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did but chose not to engage. He gave me space, the kind of space that feels more like abandonment. We stopped having meals together. I worked evening shifts. He claimed to be in back-to-back meetings or on business trips. Sometimes he wouldn't come home until after midnight. I'd wake up to the sound of the shower and pretend to be asleep. The only consistent thing in our marriage was the distance. And even that grew. Eventually, I started noticing little changes. Daniel bought a second car, told me it was for client meetings, but he kept the keys hidden. I found receipts for dinners in restaurants I'd never been to. He had a separate credit card account, one I only discovered by accident when checking our joint statements. I confronted him once. He laughed. "Don't be paranoid, Olivia. I run a business. Things happen fast. You wouldn't understand." He always had an answer, and I always backed down. I'd spent so long shrinking myself to make room for him that I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. But even then, I clung to the pieces. The man who made me feel seen that first night. The husband who still kissed me goodbye in the mornings. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too needy, too dramatic, too tired to try harder. One night, after a double shift at the nursing center, I came home and found a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. Liv gone to dinner with a client, leftovers in the fridge. D. The fridge was empty, the lights were off. I ate cereal by myself and tried not to cry. And yet somehow I still believed he loved me. Until the night everything shattered. It was a Thursday night in late March when everything finally snapped into focus. I had stayed late at work to sit with Mr. Patel, one of my favorite patients. His daughter was stuck in traffic and he didn't want to be alone. We talked about his time in the Navy, about how he used to dance with his wife in the living room every Friday night, no matter how tired they were. Before I left, he squeezed my hand and said, "You take care of people like it's your calling, Olivia. Don't let anyone tell you that's not enough." I didn't realize then how much I needed to hear those words. When I got home, Daniel wasn't there. I wasn't surprised. The lights in his office were on, so I figured he'd come back and gone straight to work. I walked past the door heading for the kitchen when I heard his voice. It wasn't loud, but there was a sharpness in it I hadn't heard in a long time. "No, she still doesn't know," he said, laughing. "She thinks I'm working late again. It's pathetic, really. She's so desperate to believe the best in me." There was a pause. I crept closer to the slightly ajar door. "I've already got her signature on the transfer documents," he continued. "Told her it was paperwork for the home equity line. She didn't even read it. Just signed." I felt my stomach drop. There was silence on the other end, then Daniel spoke again. "Yes, the house. Technically it was her mom's, but I convinced her to put it in my name to streamline the mortgage refi. Once the divorce is final, I sell it, pay off the small loan and walk away clean. She walks away with maybe enough to rent a studio." Another laugh, colder this time. "I married her for the emotional brand. You know, sweetener, salt of the earth, humble roots, it looks good in a bio. Clients eat that up. It's relatable. But now she's just a liability." I felt like I couldn't breathe. He went on for another few minutes, talking numbers, projections, how he was already scouting condos in the city. At some point, I stopped listening. I backed away, heart-pounding, vision blurred. The world felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's nightmare play out in front of me. That night, I lay in bed next to him, barely able to keep still. He curled toward me, one arm resting on my waist like nothing had happened. "Sleep okay, Liv?" he murmured. I didn't answer. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in years. Not because I was ill, but because I needed space to think, to plan, to figure out whether I was going to survive this. I spent hours going through our financial records, passwords I had long forgotten, accounts Daniel insisted he would handle. Every paper, every digital statement, every transaction I could access. And what I found was worse than I had imagined. Daniel had slowly and systematically moved assets out of our joint accounts and into separate business entities he controlled. He had used my signature sometimes, forged, sometimes obtained, through manipulation to redirect ownership of the house, the investment account, even the old jewelry box my mother left me. Worse, the house, the one my mother worked 20 years to pay off, had been leveraged as collateral for a loan Daniel took to expand his architecture firm. He never told me. He never even asked. And that document he referred to in the phone call? I found it. A neatly labeled folder titled Mortgage Adjustment Packet. Inside, buried among harmless-looking forms, was a signed deed transfer. My signature was there. I remembered signing it. I had been half asleep on the couch, and he told me it was just for the loan paperwork routine stuff. I had given him control of everything. And he had planned this from the beginning. There was no more doubt, no more rationalizing. The man I loved, the man I promised to stand beside, had used me. He never saw me as his equal, just a stepping stone, a narrative, a tool. I was devastated. But beneath the grief, something else began to grow. A fire. Quiet at first, but steady. I wasn't going to walk away quietly. The following Monday, I made an appointment with Linda Fraser. She was a name I remembered from years ago, a close friend of my mother's who had once helped her settle a tenant dispute. My mother had always spoken of her with respect, calling her a woman who sees through smoke and mirrors. Linda was in her 60s now, semi-retired, but still took on a few cases a year, especially ones that smelled rotten, as she put it. She welcomed me into her office with a firm handshake and a pot of herbal tea already steeping. I wasn't sure how to begin, but once I did, the words tumbled out, everything from the night I overheard Daniel's call to the forged documents and hidden accounts. Linda listened carefully, occasionally scribbling notes, her sharp eyes never leaving mine. When I finally stopped talking, she leaned back in her chair and said calmly, "You've been through hell, but I'll tell you this right now, we're not going to let him win." Her confidence felt like oxygen. We spent the next several hours reviewing every document. I brought bank statements, digital contracts, emails, mortgage papers. She asked me to get copies of anything I could access online and warned me not to alert Daniel by acting differently at home. Play the part, she advised. Let him think he's already won. It wasn't hard. Daniel barely noticed me those days anyway. He was too busy taking calls in hushed tones, checking his phone constantly, and going out for client meetings in clothes a little too casual for business. In the meantime, Linda did what she did best. She dug. One afternoon, she called me into her office, a curious glint in her eyes. "Olivia," she said slowly, "tell me again about the house. The one your mother left you." I nodded. "It was fully paid off when she died. She put it in my name, but Daniel convinced me to put it under joint ownership so we could refinance and use it to fund his expansion. He said it was temporary." I trusted him. Linda didn't respond at first. She pulled a thick folder from her drawer. "Your mother didn't just leave you the house," she said. "She left you a legacy, and she protected it." Inside the folder was a copy of a trust document, one I had never seen before. It had been filed through a private attorney and recorded with the county under my mother's maiden name. This trust, Linda explained, was created 22 years ago. It holds ownership of the property, which means even though your name is on the deed, it's technically under the umbrella of the Harper Family Living Trust. The transfer you signed was meaningless in legal terms. Daniel can't sell the house. He can't even touch it. I blinked. Why didn't I know about this? Linda smiled gently. Your mother didn't want you to, not until you needed it. She also left a letter which the trustee submitted for verification this morning. She handed it to me. I held the paper with trembling hands. My mother's handwriting was instantly familiar, loopy, careful, full of warmth. My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong. I hope I'm mistaken. I hope the man you married is kind and fair. But if he is not, I want you to know I saw this possibility and I prepared for it. I've watched women in our family give everything and walk away with nothing. I refuse to let that happen to you. I created this trust to protect your future from the world and from anyone who would mistake your goodness for weakness. I know how deeply you love. I know how much you forgive. But you are also strong. And if the time ever comes, don't be afraid to fight. Love always, Mom. I didn't cry immediately. The tears came later in my car when I realized she had been protecting me even after death. Linda gave me a moment, then added, "That's not all." She opened another folder. "Your mother didn't just secure the house. She also invested small sums. Nothing huge, just careful, consistent deposits into a long-term trust account. Mutual funds, municipal bonds, conservative stocks. And because she did it early and never touched the principal, Olivia, that account is now worth over $3.5 million. I stared at her speechless. She kept it quiet. Linda continued, because the trust was designed to mature upon two triggers: your 35th birthday, which is still a few months away, or in the event of a legal separation caused by documented betrayal. She looked me straight in the eye. "We have everything we need. Over the next few weeks we prepared." Linda instructed me to remain calm at home. I continued cooking dinner, asking about Daniel's day, even laughing at his terrible jokes. It was painful, but it was also empowering. Every time he looked at me like I was small, I reminded myself that he had no idea what was coming. Linda compiled evidence. The recorded phone call I captured, the financial documents showing coercion, the timeline of his asset transfers, even social media posts linking him to someone named Melissa, likely one of the clients he was meeting so often. We also petitioned the court to submit the trust documentation and the letter from my mother under seal to be opened during the final hearing. Daniel's team was notified of additional disclosures, but didn't bother requesting to view them, overconfident as always. The night before the hearing, I packed a small bag and booked a hotel room. Daniel barely noticed I was gone. He sent me a text. "Let's just make this easy, Liv. You'll land on your feet. You always do." I didn't respond. I turned off my phone, curled under the hotel duvet, and for the first time in years slept through the night. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. A few murmurs passed between legal assistants. The sound of heels clicking against the tile echoed faintly, but mostly there was an eerie calm. Daniel arrived 10 minutes early, as confident as ever, dressed like he was giving a TED Talk. Charcoal suit, pocket square, a half smirk fixed on his face. His legal team, two younger attorneys in sharp suits, carried thick binders and whispered with assured authority. I walked in with Linda. She wore a simple navy dress and carried nothing but a leather folio and a fountain pen. We took our seats. Judge Miriam Blake, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a voice that cut through noise like a knife, called the room to order. She addressed the court with practiced patience, outlining the goals for the final hearing and inviting opening remarks. Daniel's attorney rose first. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is fairly straightforward. My client, Mr. Daniel Marks, is seeking a fair and expedient dissolution of his marriage to Mrs. Olivia Marks. As per the financial records, Mr. Marks was the primary income earner during the marriage. Mrs. Marks, while hardworking in her field, did not contribute significantly to the household finances. Accordingly, Mr. Marks is offering a generous settlement, including a one-time payment, continued coverage on their shared insurance for 6 months, and assistance with temporary housing." He looked over at me, nodded respectfully, then sat down. Judge Blake turned to Linda. "Ms. Fraser." Linda stood slowly. "Your Honor," she said. "While the opposing counsel believes this case to be straightforward, we contend that it is in fact deeply layered, and that several assets and actions taken during the course of this marriage deserve further scrutiny." Daniel raised an eyebrow. Linda continued, calm and measured. "To begin, we'd like to enter into evidence a sealed document previously submitted to the court, containing a verified letter from the late Evelyn Harper, mother of Mrs. Marks, and an estate record held in trust for her daughter." Judge Blake nodded, motioning to the clerk. The envelope was opened. As the judge began reading silently, the courtroom grew still. I watched Daniel. His face was unreadable. Perhaps he assumed it was some sentimental letter from a grieving mother. Perhaps he didn't care. Then the judge cleared her throat. "According to this letter," she said, her tone sharp, "Mrs. Harper established a trust fund 22 years ago under the name Olivia Harper. This trust holds multiple financial instruments and assets, most notably the title to the residential property located at 811 Maple Lane." Daniel flinched. "That house," the judge continued, "was never legally owned outright by Mr. Marks. Despite his claim that the property was refinanced under joint ownership, the trust was never dissolved, and therefore the property remains the legal possession of the Harper Family Living Trust. Daniel's attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, we were not made aware. You had the opportunity to review sealed evidence, Judge Blake interrupted, and failed to do so. Continue, Ms. Fraser. Linda stepped forward. In addition, Your Honor, we submit these documents, recordings, and transcripts of conversations in which Mr. Marks outlines a premeditated plan to obtain ownership of the house and other marital assets through deception, misrepresentation, and coercion. Daniel stood up. Your Honor, that's ridiculous. That conversation was taken out of context. Judge Blake raised a hand. You will have a chance to respond. Sit down. Daniel sat, his composure slipping. Linda opened her folder and pulled out a printed transcript. This recording, she said, was taken in Mr. Marks's office with no coercion and no provocation. In it, he states verbatim that he married Mrs. Marks to benefit his business image, that he manipulated her into signing property transfers she didn't understand, and that he intended to divorce her once he had sufficient financial control. Linda read the line that still echoed in my head. She thinks I married her for love. It's pathetic. Once the divorce is final, she'll get nothing. The words hung in the room like smoke. Judge Blake looked at Daniel. Is that your voice on the recording? Mr. Marks, Daniel's lawyer, leaned in and whispered something. Daniel looked trapped but tried to remain calm. It is, he said, but I was venting. That's not the full context. We'll take the full context under advisement, Judge Blake said. Now tell me, Mr. Marks, were you aware of the value and existence of the Harper Family Trust? Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. No, he admitted. I didn't know about any trust. Linda stepped in. That's because Mrs. Harper took care to protect her daughter's future. This trust not only holds the property in question, but also an investment account currently valued at $3.5 million. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Daniel went pale. Judge Blake leaned back in her chair, silent for a moment. Then she spoke clearly and without hesitation. Given the contents of this evidence, it's clear that several actions were taken during the marriage that involved deception, coercion, and what may constitute financial fraud. It is this court's position that the Harper Family Trust, including all associated properties and financial accounts, remains the sole legal possession of Mrs. Olivia Marks and is not subject to division. Daniel stared at the table in front of him, jaw clenched. Furthermore, the judge continued, the prenuptial agreement previously submitted is hereby rendered void due to fraud and failure to disclose material facts, Mr. Marks's efforts to acquire assets under false pretenses invalidate the protections otherwise offered by said agreement. Daniel's attorney stood again. Your Honor, may we request time to know, the judge said firmly. This matter is concluded today. She turned to me. Mrs. Marks, you will retain all assets associated with the Harper Family Trust. In addition, you are entitled to 50% of all marital assets accrued during the marriage, including investment returns, joint business revenue, and liquid funds. Daniel's mouth opened slightly. He looked stunned. The judge turned to him one final time. Mr. Marks, given the evidence of deceptive intent, this court is also ordering that you pay all legal fees associated with your wife's representation in full within the next 30 days. The gavel hit the wood. Court is adjourned. Daniel didn't move for several seconds. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder. He shrugged it off. As I stood to leave, I felt something shift inside me. Not just relief, but clarity. I had spent years believing I wasn't enough, that I was lucky to be loved by someone like Daniel. But that was never love. That was leverage, and I wasn't his stepping stone. Outside the courthouse, he caught up to me. Olivia, wait. Please. I turned. He looked tired now, deflated. His perfect hair was a little messy, his tie askew. That letter, that trust. You knew I did, I said softly. You played me. No, I said. You played yourself. I just stopped pretending not to see it. I made mistakes, he said. I lost sight of things. But we can fix this. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. You don't miss me, I said. You miss control. And now that it's gone, you don't know what to do. He reached for my arm, but I stepped back. My mother used to say the most dangerous man is the one who thinks you owe him your gratitude for letting him hurt you. I never meant to hurt you, he said. But you did. Repeatedly. And you knew you were doing it. His face twisted, trying to form some excuse. But I'd heard enough. I turned to go, then paused. Oh, and Daniel, I said, my voice calm. That nurse you laughed at, she just bought a second property. And she's donating a wing to the very hospital where we met. I walked away. This time he didn't follow. After the hearing, I didn't go back to the hotel. I didn't call anyone. I drove to the old neighborhood where my mother raised me, parked in front of the small house we once shared, and just sat there. The curtains were different. The porch paint had faded. But in that moment, I could still feel her. I remembered coming home from school to the smell of fresh bread. I remembered the night she stayed up late sewing, making dresses for clients who could barely afford to pay, so she could buy my school books. I remembered her telling me over and over again that love is not blind, it's deliberate. You don't fall into love, you choose it, every day. I had chosen wrong, but she had not. My mother had seen a future I couldn't imagine for myself. She had planned for it quietly and carefully, building a wall of protection without telling me. Not because she didn't trust me, but because she knew I trusted too easily. She knew someone like Daniel would see my compassion and mistake it for weakness, and she refused to let me become another woman, discarded by a man who measured worth by status and control. When I opened the trust documents again that night, I noticed a page I hadn't read closely before. It was dated just months before her death. A handwritten note in the margin said, "If Olivia ever needs this early, something has gone very wrong. And if so, let her have everything, without apology." I wept then, not from sadness, not even from relief, but from the overwhelming truth that I had been loved so fiercely, so thoughtfully by a woman who never once asked to be recognized for it. In the weeks that followed, I moved back into the house. My house, the one Daniel tried to steal, the one my mother saved. I planted flowers in the front yard. Lavender, her favorite. I returned to work at the nursing home not because I needed the money anymore, but because I missed the people. I missed being of service. That part of me never left. Wealth hadn't changed that, and it never would. I also started a small scholarship fund in my mother's name, the Evelyn Harper Grant, for women in healthcare returning to school after hardship. The first recipient was a single mom working night shifts while attending nursing classes. She cried when I handed her the award. I told her, "You deserve this." And so much more. As for Daniel, he didn't disappear. People like him rarely do. He tried to make a comeback. I saw an article about him months later, something about a new consulting firm. But the smile in the photo wasn't quite the same. Something in his eyes had dimmed, like he knew the world no longer saw him the way he once insisted it should. He never reached out again, not after the courthouse parking lot. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to say. Or maybe he finally understood that whatever power he thought he had over me was gone. Sometimes people assume revenge has to be loud, explosive, public. But the most powerful kind I've learned is quiet. It's waking up without fear. It's looking in the mirror and seeing someone whole. It's walking into a room with nothing to prove. People like Daniel think control is strength. But true strength, it's choosing to heal. It's rebuilding your life not just to survive, but to thrive. I don't hate him anymore because I don't need to. The best thing he ever did for me was underestimate me. And the best thing I ever did for myself was finally stop underestimating my own worth. So here's what I'll say to anyone who feels invisible in their own life. You are not small because someone else fails to see you. You are not worthless because someone once treated you like an accessory. And if someone tells you that you're just a nurse, just a teacher, just a woman with nothing special, smile. Because someday they may find themselves across from you, in a courtroom, wondering how they ever thought they were the one in control. And you'll walk away knowing something they never will. That quiet strength lasts longer than charm. And that kindness backed by wisdom is a force no one sees coming until it's already won.